Hey everybody, KMO here. Notice anything different? I won't tell you what it is. Anyway, just revisiting the experience I had, I don't know, a week or so ago of participating in a Twitter poll. Very casual thing. What do you think is the greater threat, AI or climate change? And I knew that most everybody would say climate change because a lot of people are expected to say climate change. In order to be a member in good standing of the Blue Tribe, you are expected to have not only a position on climate change, but a certain intensity to that position. And I don't have it because I'm not a member of that tribe. Um, so some people would just automatically assume then that I believe the exact opposite, that either climate change is a hoax or that human, industrial processes have nothing to do with it. I'm fairly agnostic about that. I am scientifically literate enough to understand the heat trapping capacity of atmospheric CO2, and that if you increase the CO2 in the atmosphere, that that it is likely that more solar radiation will be retained and the temperature will increase. But how much CO2 is required? We're told that 300 parts per million, which we've already passed, is the absolute bare minimum for human survivability, and I just don't think that's the case. I mean, parts per million of CO2 has been in the thousands in the past when terrestrial life was around, mammals were around, not humans necessarily, certainly not modern humans, but I just don't think, as somebody who posted a comment to one of my previous videos in this topic said, AI is underfeared and climate is overfeared, and I agree with both of those. And on the climate side, the people that I see, you know, positioning themselves or signaling with the most emotional intensity are the people who just don't seem to have much knowledge about science in general. They might think that they are on the side of science or that science vindicates their political, allegiances, but it doesn't seem that way to me. And I take a lifelong interest in science, you know, and not just on one topic, and not just when it aligns with my political convictions. Because my political convictions, while intensely held in the past, at this time I'm as agnostic of my own political preferences as I am of anybody's. And ultimately, I'm of the position that it remains to be demonstrated that there is one single political ideology which always produces the best results in any circumstances. I'm definitely open to the idea that in some circumstances and at some points in history, one political philosophy will do better than others, if implemented, but that always won't be the case, that, a different set of circumstances might come along later and a different, political agenda is likely to be the most salutary or beneficial. But earlier today, just for shits and giggles, I was reading, lists of predictions of climactic doom from the past that just didn't come to pass. And of course, the granddaddy of them, at least for the 20th century, is Paul Ehrlich. He's the author of a book called The Population Bomb, and this is on my mind recently because, in a context I won't even mention or specifically mention, um, once again, a well-off person is hand-wringing about there being too many poor people in the world, and the poor people are going to eat all the food and leave the rich people, relatively rich people, hungry. That, to me, that is not only a dumb concern, it's just vile on its face. There are too many poor people. They're replicating too quickly. They're going to eat up all the food. They are going to diminish the standard of living of the people who deserve to live better than they are, than those poor people live. Gross. One, it's just not true. And two, gross. But anyway, Paul Ehrlich made a big name for himself and made a bunch of money back in the 60s saying, yeah, population's exploding. It's going to be absolute catastrophe. So here's an article from 1967, the year before my birth, and I'm 54. Los Angeles Times writer George Getz writes, Los Angeles. It is already too late for the world to avoid a long period of famine, a Stanford University biologist said Thursday. Paul Ehrlich said, quote, time of famines, close quote, is upon us and will be at its worst and most disastrous by 1975. He said the population of the United States is already too big, and that birth control may have to be accomplished by making it involuntary and by putting sterilizing agents into staple foods and drinking water, and that the Roman Catholic Church should be pressured into going along with routine measures of population control. This guy's a liberal hero. Let's jump ahead a little bit. Here's an article from The Guardian. This is from 2004. This is the first Bush administration. The Guardian writes, climate change over the next 20 years could result in global catastrophe costing millions of lives in wars and natural disasters. A secret report suppressed by U.S. defense chiefs and obtained by The Observer warns that major European cities will be sunk beneath rising seas as Britain is plunged into a Siberian climate by 2020. Nuclear conflict, mega droughts, famine, and widespread rioting will erupt across the world. Okay, by 2020. Let me remind you, it is 2022. Have millions of people died in wars in the past 2 decades? Yes. Largely because of the war on terror. Largely because of the United States invading first Afghanistan and then Iraq. And most of the people who died, I think, this is off the top of my head without doing a lot of research, were civilians, Iraqi civilians. Now, how many Iraqi civilians had been killed by U.S. sanctions against Iraq in the 1990s? A non-trivial number, many of them children. Was that because of climate change? Now, here's a fun thing. Back in, say, 2008, 2009, if you had told me that the Iraq War was a sign of peak oil, was verification, proof positive of, the correctness of not only the peak oil theory, but of the urgency with which we should regard it, I would have been open to that. Just in the same way that a lot of people now, if you tell them that the 2001 attack on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, and then all the wars of retribution, that followed, and really not so much wars of retribution, so much as wars in the service of attempting to create a U.S. military empire in the Middle East, and a series of stable democratic client states, which clearly that didn't go so well. But if somebody were attempting to reframe that now as as proof positive of the effects of climate change, lots of people would be amenable to that and take it seriously. So was it simply geopolitics? Was it clash of civilization? Was it Islam versus the West? Was it climate change? Was it peak oil? Depending on your priorities, you can take any of those seriously and dismiss the rest. Or if you want to be a contrarian about it, or a meta-contrarian, you're going to gravitate to a position that is more difficult to hold in your mind because it has more moving parts. So you could say every one of those, was a contributing factor, except clash of civilizations, because that's not, if you're Blue Tribe, that's not acceptable. You can't talk about Islam not being, fundamentally being incompatible with the values of the West, so-called. So there's a YouTuber whose consistency I admire, and whose ability to just get on camera and flow without much preparation and notes I admire, and whose viewership statistics I certainly envy, a guy named Styx Hexenhammer, a Vermonter from Rutland. I don't know that he's in the United States. He was in Europe for a while. But anyway, he makes several videos a day. And he just gets up and, flows. And then when he hits a pause, he says, that's about all. Peace out. And I should do that. I can't use that line. I would, even if most of you don't watch him, I would still feel icky just stealing his formulaic close. But when I hit a pause, I stop and I think about what else to say. I should just, as soon as I hit that pause, say, well, that's about all for now. Catch you later. That avoids the half-hour videos, where 40% of people drop out after 30 seconds. And 20% make it to the end. This, if I cut out a couple places where I had to pause for passing cars and airplanes and such, could be a 10-minute video. So yeah, I think that's about it. Catch you later.